Richard Gabriel, the best jury consultant in the world, according to me, and his team, which can include Michelle Ward when he's there. Richard, meet Jill Zarin, one of the original gangsters, as I'm going to call it, from the Real Housewives of New York City, which really means New York, because New York City is New York. It's the best. And welcome back, Richard.
Richard, good to see you again.
Good to see you guys too. Exciting.
Yeah. So as a great jury consultant, first of all, we want to know what you think of today, and then Jill has questions for you. You won't believe.
Always like those. So yeah, today, I mean, both of them dug in and did what they did. As we know, I mean, Hank Brennan's a good lawyer. He really is. And
whether you like him or not.
Well,
whether you like him or not.
You know what? A good lawyer to me is someone who can get through to me to make sure I pay attention to everything you're saying, right? If you're a good lawyer, you want to make sure as a juror, I'm listening to you.
Right. Well, Jill, you would be a good defense juror. You would be an excellent defense juror in a case like this. And like a lot of people, they do. It depends which way you're leaning anyways. You know, jury selection is about how people already feel about a highly publicized case like this. So, I mean, that's one of the issues that I think Hank actually was dealing with initially, which is, you know, people have heard about this case. They've seen about this case. They come in preloaded with a lot of opinions about this case. And as we know about confirmation bias, people always want to gather evidence to support what they already believe. So that's where the critical part of jury selection is really whether they found people who truly were open-minded or whether people had already made up their minds originally. So, you know, that's sort of where I think the rubber meets the road with where these jurors are at. Obviously, the real thing that's happening right now as we're talking is those jurors are really, the dynamics of deliberation are playing out. How do they feel about each other? How do they feel about, do they get along with each other? Obviously, prosecution needs a unanimous jury on here. So any dissent like they had last time is a big problem for them. If people come preloaded with, again, a lot of problems with the case, then, you know, obviously prosecution is going to have a huge uphill battle here. And as you saw with Alan Jackson in his closing, he hit things very hard. Alan Jackson is a great lawyer, and he made some obviously points that, funny enough, go back to what we experienced in the OJ case, which is when we were finishing up OJ Simpson, we did a focus group which said, should Johnny Cochran in his closing argument,
which trial of OJ? Which trial?
The first trial.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, the first murder trial. We asked jurors in a focus group, do you want Johnny to basically talk about this widespread conspiracy, or do you want it to be more of a localized cover-up of of our lead investigators, Van Adder and Lang and all those guys and stuff, and Furman and stuff? And they said, no, we want, it's really the contaminated examination, the contaminated investigation, which Alan Jackson used here. So you can't trust the investigation, you can't trust the evidence. That's really the theme that he brought to this. And that obviously is what he's hoping to create reasonable doubt here. And so I think he did a very good job trying to do this. And as you saw, you know, they said they weren't going to go for this sort of widespread conspiracy. There was motions about that and stuff. And to a certain extent, that's a very smart strategy, because it's hard to sell that an entire department's in on it.
Richard, here's my question for you. Are you surprised? What do you make of still having all 18 jurors at the end of this trial, 6 alts all in place?
Well, you know, again, this thing is such a big case. It's been around for such a long time. People are really motivated. Jurors are really motivated to stick with it. You know, aside from some extreme.
You know what? I feel bad for the alternates, because, you know, they stayed for 30 days. They had to get up early in the morning. They had to give up their lives, and they don't even get to give their opinion.
Yeah, so everybody is hoping to participate. Everybody wants to be able to tell the story at the end of this case about how they sat through the entire trial there. Whether that's because they say, I want to be here to convict, or whether they say, I want to be here because I really have an agenda to acquit Karen Read, that's another thing. I mean, we are always looking at the motivation of jurors in terms of sticking with it. Typically jurors want to look for any excuse to get out of jury duty. But in this case, there's a lot of motivation, whether to stick with it, at least just for the story.
Let me just say something to all of you may not know out there.
And
Richard has an experience with Alan Jackson, because Richard was my jury consultant, and Phil Spector, where Alan Jackson for 6 months was our adversary, and we fought very hard in court, and then ended up, having this mutual respect for each other, as Richard knows. But so, Richard, you know Alan Jackson from the other side. Tell me what you saw differently in the years that's passed that he's now switched to the defense side.
The only difference is that he switched sides. I mean, he's still a very, very aggressive, very, very good attorney. I mean, look, the challenge for a lot of prosecutors, or it's not for prosecutors, is that in a case like this, typically, a lot of prosecutors are dealing with public defenders that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And so as a result, there's a lot of camaraderie. There's plea agreements that happen. And as a result, public defenders tend to be very shy about being very aggressive. So a vast majority of the cases that prosecutors do, they're not dealing with people who come at them with both fists, with guns and knives, and ready to really do battle. And so Alan is not shy at all, as we saw in Spector, about that. In fact, there's obviously some real questions about some of the tactics he used pre-trial, about whether he's really doing these PR campaigns to really try and influence the jury pool, and sometimes the ethics of that. So there's a lot of things. When he takes it so seriously to say, I'm an advocate for my client, and he goes full bore on that.
I also think of this also, that the juror, even though the judge is supposed to be impartial, common sense tells me that the judge and the prosecutor are kind of on one side, and the defense is on the other. So it kind of evens it out if he did a PR campaign. Especially in this case, I think Bev proves my point.
We've had that, right? Where the judge is so biased, they're biased against you, but they normally are biased in a way that is not so clear. This was a little over the top in my view. But how to take her out of the equation? I've been saying to everybody that that Hank Brennan, despite what you dislike him, is a good lawyer. But I thought he did some snaky, sleazy things in this trial.
The truth is that at this point, jurors, whatever they think of the prosecutors or the defense thing, they're, for the most part, they understand both sides are trying to play the game. They understand both sides of that. That's what they're going back there. They're kind of dismissing that, whether they like Alan Jackson or whether they like Hank Brennan or not. It kind of becomes irrelevant at some point, because they really, to a certain extent, go, okay, what's our job? We've been here for 30 days on this case. We have a lot of evidence. They do, and this is, I truly believe, jurors do a really good job of kind of focusing on what happened here. Does the forensic evidence support that he was hit by the car? What do they think of the witness statements about her saying, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him? All those things really are what they talk about. Jurors, for the most part, though, understand that both sides are going to be incredibly aggressive, that they're both sides going to be focusing on stuff. And sometimes they kind of go, that's their job, is to try and impugn credibility.
5-1. Richard, on this case, who would you think would have been the ideal juror, male or female, or does it matter?
I don't think demographics matters in this case.
Why do you think a juror could think Hank Brennan is a good lawyer? Let's from a jury consultant point of view.
Why would a juror think he's a good lawyer?
Yeah, right.
So I mean, I think that there's a lot of jurors don't mind the overly aggressive, even obnoxious thing. For the most part, that intense, kind of approach. First of all, it can keep your attention. They expect the battle in the courtroom in there. And I think there's a thing. I mean, there are times where I've said, boy, that seems over the top. Yeah. And people these days, people are very passionate these days. We live in very polarized times. So having somebody express some real intense conviction, whichever you may believe on this, is something that is gratifying for people. How
long is it going to take to get an answer? Yes, obviously nobody knows, but what's your educated guess?
So the two things that happen here is this. There are two types of deliberations typically with a jury. There's what we call evidence-driven deliberations or verdict-driven deliberations. And sometimes it depends on just what the foreman wants to do. So a foreman will sit down and go, okay, everybody, let's see where we're at. How many yeses, how many nos on this question? That's quicker. That's a faster thing because sometimes if everybody agrees, boy, they're done pretty quickly here. The evidence-driven deliberation, which is done sometimes by a foreman or a foreperson, is where there's like, okay, let's break it down. Let's kind of go through the evidence piece by piece to see where we stand. That can take a long time. The other thing that creates division here, hang on, Jill. The only thing that can take a little bit more time is if there's obviously conflict in the jury room, like there was last time. If people are really divided, then it's going to take a lot longer.
So what happens? They had the break. So do they Monday, since the judges told them yesterday not to take a straw vote, would they come in Monday and do take a straw vote to see where they're at, or what?
So I think it depends a little bit on what the conversations were today. Whether, I mean, what can reasonably happen here is even if they don't take a straw poll, is I think they can say, okay, let's talk about the issues here. There's obviously major issues in the case that they can start kicking around. Then they sit over the weekend and they think about it and they kind of know where everybody else is at on stuff. So I think at that point, either they come back in and again start deliberating on some of the issues here, or they say, okay, if it looks like from this initial